Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace, or do they have more sinister motives? Join Mad Mark as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that puzzle us all on Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark.
Today's episode, The Great Flood and Sex Between the Gods and Mankind. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Episode 7 of Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. I'm Mad Mark, and today, before I begin, just a quick reminder to please like, share, and comment. It helps so much I can't even tell you. I would also like to mention that I have created a new Facebook page specifically for this program. I put a link in the show description, so go ahead and follow me over there. I'm hoping that this will become a place where we can all gather to discuss each episode and where you can voice your comments and questions. So please go ahead and check that out. Today we resume our studies of Zecharia Sitchin's first book, The 12th Planet, published by Stein and Day in 1976. Continuing with Chapter 12, when we left off with Episode 6, we were continuing our discussion about the creation of mankind and what actually took place in the research facility known as the Eden, and how all humans originally looked basically the same until the Anunnaki decided to brand us so that each god's humans would look different from the other god's humans. So, after the Eden was forcibly shut down by Enlil, the humans were forced to leave, not only the Eden facility, but Mesopotamia in general, and settle east of there. Were the humans eventually allowed to return to Mesopotamia? Of course, but we don't know the exact date. All we are told is that it happened during the time of Enosh. The Bible is in such a hurry to get to the story of the deluge that it skips much of this information and instead gives us a rundown on the patriarchs who followed Enosh. One of these was Enoch, who was very important on a number of levels, not the least of which was the fact that at age 365 he was carried aloft by the deity, never again to return to earth. Then, a few generations later, the man of many names, Utnapishtim in Akkadian, Ziusudra in Sumerian, and Noah in the Bible, is born. And, by this time, humanity is undergoing great hardships. Obviously, we do not have any climate data from those days. However, having recently exited the Ice Age, we can assume that the Earth was undergoing great climate changes and shifts similar to today. The rains were not coming, the land was not producing healthy crops, and on the poles, a lot of snow and ice was melting. A lot. Keep that in mind as we continue, because the stage was now set for the Great Deluge, that momentous event that we are all familiar with that just about wiped humanity off the face of the earth. And, once again, the confusing Bible version only tells us a small portion of what really happened. This was not an event caused by an angry deity. It was the result of natural climate changes as the earth continued to warm following the last ice age. The Bible tells us, and the deity saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every desire of his heart's thoughts was only evil every day. And the deity repented that he had made man upon the earth, and his heart grieved. And the deity said, I will destroy the earthling whom I have created off the face of the earth. Those are some pretty hefty accusations. Those darn humans are at it again. It seems as though everything we did in those days pissed God off. First the Tower of Babel, then we get the knowing and the ability to procreate, and now this, whatever it was. But I find myself wondering once again, how did the creator of the universe not see this coming? Weren't we always taught that he sees and knows everything? even before it happens, right? So, what exactly was this evil, this terrible thing that man had now done that angered this deity so much that he wanted us wiped off the face of the earth? These accusations by this deity are not very specific. Scholars and theologians alike can find no satisfactory answers as to what sins or violations could have upset this deity so much. He does continually use the word flesh in his accusations and judgments. Could it be that now, having acquired the ability to procreate, man had turned into a bunch of sex maniacs? You know, it's hard to believe that this deity would choose to wipe mankind off the face of the earth simply for having sex with their wives. Unless, of course, this is another case of do as I say, not as I do. Because the Mesopotamian texts are filled with eloquent stories of lovemaking among the gods. Tender love between the gods and their consorts, even lovemaking between the gods and their concubines, and even between the gods and their own sisters, daughters, and granddaughters. Yes, such gods could never turn against mankind for behaving as they themselves were. Monkey see, monkey do, right? No, this deity's motives, we will discover, were not over his concerns for human morals. His mounting disgust was caused by the spreading defilement of the gods themselves. And understanding this makes the vague meaning of the opening verses of Genesis chapter 6 become crystal clear. And it came to pass, when the earthlings began to increase in number upon the face of the earth, and the daughters were born unto them, that the sons of the deities saw the daughters of the earthlings, that they were compatible. And they took unto themselves wives of whichever they chose. So there you have it. It makes perfect sense now. This deity, who was once again Enlil, was not upset so much with what the humans were doing, but with what the male gods were doing to the human females. And once again, the humans got the blame for it. So Enki gives mankind the ability to procreate, as we discussed in episode 6, not the fault of the humans. Then the male offspring of these gods, or Anunnaki, begin having sex with the female daughters or offspring of the humans. Again, not our fault. And what does all that cause? The deterioration of Anunnaki DNA. We can now understand the importance put on the Noah character for being a righteous man, pure in his genealogies. So, this deity is upset with the humans for what the males of his own species did to the human females, and thus decides to wipe them from the face of the earth. But then, at the last minute, changes his mind and decides to save the genetically pure Noah from the destruction so that the pure human seed will survive and repopulate the planet. So Noah is alerted to the upcoming catastrophe, and he is told that he has 7 days in which to build the ark, waterproof it, and collect all the people and creatures who are to be saved. I would like to insert a small footnote here. This actually did happen. I know that there are people out there who will debate this fact even now. But the flood was not sent by a deity, and it was not the entire planet that was flooded. A massive chunk of ice broke off from the South Pole due to the continual melting of the ice caps after the Ice Age. Now, when I say massive, I mean really massive. Massive enough to cause a tidal wave that decimated South America, Africa, and all the way up to Mesopotamia. The reason that we often hear that this flood was worldwide, which is technically impossible, is because the only inhabited areas on Earth at that time were Africa and the Middle East, and so to them it was the entire world. I will examine this entire incident in more detail in the future. So, returning to the story, in the Bible we read that on that day all the foundations of the great deep burst open, and the deluge was 40 days upon the earth. And the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. And the waters became stronger and greatly increased upon the earth. And the ark floated upon the waters, and the waters became increasingly strong upon the earth, and all the high mountains were covered. We all know this adaptation of the story, so let's keep moving along. According to the Bible, after the waters receded and it was safe to come out of the ark, the first thing that Noah did was to build an altar and offer burnt sacrifices to the deity. And the Bible continues, and the deity smelled the enticing smell and said in his heart, I shall no longer curse the dry land on account of the earthling, for his heart's desire is evil from his youth. What can I say? I'm speechless. It's just another biblical story chock full of contradictions. It begins with this deity indicting mankind for various abominations. He then makes the decision to wipe mankind from the face of the earth. Then, a mere 7 days later, this same deity changes his mind and decides to save Noah and his family so that mankind and the many creatures of earth will not perish. Then, when the crisis is finally over, this same deity, supposedly, remember, the creator of the universe, is enticed by the smell of roasting meat and dismisses the whole thing, blaming man's evil desires on his youth. But, once again, the Sumerian texts are here to help us to decipher this mess and turn it into something that actually makes a little sense. Once again, the monotheistic Bible has turned a story involving many gods who were not always in accord with one another and changed it to revolve around just one deity who can't seem to make up his mind. According to the Sumerian texts, once the Anunnaki scientists discovered a gigantic ice shelf in Antarctica was about to break off, which would result in much devastation to the southern hemisphere, an emergency council was held. And again, I will go into all of this in depth in the future, but in keeping with the flow of Mr. Sitchin's book, I'm forced to give the abbreviated version for now. The council is informed by Enlil, the supreme commander, that all of the Anunnaki should prepare for a mass launch into space to ride out the destruction, but that all of the Earthlings are to be left behind to die. He commands their silence in this matter, and all of the council agrees to keep it quiet from the humans. But of course, and thankfully, Enki does not agree. And he devises a plan by which he can still keep his vow to Enlil and the council, but also secretly inform Zeusudra, or Noah, of the coming calamity. As I've said before, we will cover this event in greater detail in the future, but to make a long story short, Enki visits the home of Zeusudra in the dark of night and speaks to him from behind a reed screen. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubartutu, tear down the house, build a ship, give up possessions, seek thou life, forswear belongings, keep soul alive. Aboard ship take thou all living things, a ship thou shalt build, her dimensions shall be to measure. Now, the parallels between the biblical version and the Babylonian Sumerian version of this story are quite obvious. A deluge is on the way, which will devastate the area. One man is forewarned and instructed to build a boat in order to save himself, his family, and the seed of all living things. Yet, the Babylonian Sumerian version, which was written thousands of years before the biblical version, is much more plausible. The decision to let humanity be destroyed and the effort to save some of them are not contradictory acts of a single deity, but in fact the acts of two different deities. And the decision to warn and save the Noah character is the defiant act of Enki alone, acting in secret and contrary to the wishes of Enlil and the Anunnaki Council. This decision by Enki is just another example of the growing animosity between he and his brother Enlil. We see an example of this as the Babylonian Sumerian tale unfolds. Zeusudra responds to Enki with an obvious question. How could he ever explain to the other citizens of Shuruppak the construction of this vessel and his abandoning of all of his possessions? Enki replies, "Thou shalt thus speak to them. I have learned that Enlil is hostile towards me, so that I can no longer reside in your city, nor set foot in Enlil's territory. To the Apsu I will therefore go down, to dwell with my lord Enki." So the story was concocted that as a follower of Enki, Zeusudra/Noah was no longer welcome to live in Mesopotamia. Thus, he was building a boat with which he could travel to the lower world, otherwise known as South Africa, where he could dwell in the land of his lord Enki. The method for which Zeusudra/Noah was to convince the people of Shuruppak to help him construct this vessel was equally devious. The area had been suffering from a drought for quite some time. Zeusudra/Noah was instructed by Enki to advise the people of Shuruppak that if Enlil were to see him leave, he would lift the curse and the land shall once again have its fill of harvest riches. Well, it was about to get its fill of something, not harvest riches. The people of the city bought this lame excuse and actually lent a hand in the construction of the boat, as we read on. On the 7th day, the ship was completed. Then Zeusudra/Noah put all of his family and kin aboard the ship, taking along whatever he had of all the living creatures, as well as all the animals and wild beasts of the field. But Zeusudra/Noah himself was not to board the ship until he saw a signal that a stated time would be set by Shamash, the deity in charge of the fiery rockets. Enki's words were explicit. "When Shamash, who orders a trembling at dusk, will shower down a rain of eruptions, board thou the ship, batten up the entrance." So, in other words, when the Anunnaki launched their rockets to beat ass into space and orbit the Earth until the deluge had ended, at that point it was time to get the hell out of Dodge. Afterwards, the will of Enlil and the Anunnaki Council had been accomplished, and the Earth lay barren of life. But, unbeknownst to them, the scheme of Enki had also worked, and humanity was saved. Now, in the biblical version of this story, it is Yahweh who is enticed to Noah's location by the smell of the cooking meat, and proceeds to immediately forgive mankind, and vows to never again destroy the earth with a flood, and all is well. But in the Babylonian Sumerian version, many Anunnaki appear on the scene, and then Enlil is once again enraged to discover that some humans have survived. He yells, "Has some living soul escaped? No man was to survive the destruction." A finger is pointed at Enki, who basically confesses. Enlil eventually chills out, and the story ends. Enlil had been outmaneuvered, mankind was saved, and the earth was opened up to the humans. Chapter 14. Okay, remember earlier in the deluge story when I mentioned that Zeusudra/Noah was able to convince the people of Shuruppak to help him build the ark by telling them that upon seeing him leave Mesopotamia, Enlil will surely lift his curse upon the land and harvest would once again be plentiful? I didn't have time to go into all of it then, so let's cover some of that now. Consider this a prequel to the Noah story, if you will, because there were terrible conditions in the land in those days that the Bible simply fails to mention, but that the Sumerian texts cover in great detail. It all goes back to the events immediately following Enlil's closure of the Eden facility and the expulsion of the humans from the entire area. The humans now had the ability to procreate, and procreate they did. And the more they did, and the more their population grew, the angrier Enlil became. The Sumerian texts go on to tell us that the land extended. The people multiplied in the land, like wild bulls they lay. The god over that area got disturbed by their conjugations. In other words, they were just too damn loud. The text continues, the god Enlil heard their pronouncements and said to the other great gods, oppressive have become the pronouncements of mankind. Their conjugations deprive me of sleep. Enlil, once again cast as the prosecutor of mankind, then ordered a punishment, calling for the decimation of mankind through pestilence and sicknesses. But Enlil's scheme did not work. You will notice at this point in the text, Mr. Sitchin refers to the Noah character as Atrahasis. Since that is also the name of the Babylonian flood story, I will continue to refer to him as Noah in order to prevent any confusion. Evidently, just like the gods, Noah was a being of many names. As we established earlier in the show, Noah and Enki were rather close. That is evidenced by the fact that Enki chose to save Noah over all the other humans on Earth at that time. So Noah appeals to Enki. O Lord, mankind groans. The anger of the god Enlil consumes the land. Yet it is thou who had created us. Let there cease the aches, the dizziness, the chills, and the fever. Part of the scroll was broken off at that point, so we're not sure exactly what Enki's response was. However, whatever he did, it must have worked, because we soon see Enlil once again complaining to the other gods, the people have not diminished. They are more numerous than ever before. Enlil then proceeds with a plan to extinguish mankind through starvation. What a great guy. Let supplies be cut off from the people, he commands. In their bellies let fruit and vegetables be wanting. Let the rains be withheld from above. Let the wind blow and parch the ground. Let the clouds thicken, but hold back the downpour. Even the sources of seafood were to disappear, because Enki was ordered to bar the sea and keep its food away from the people. And the drought of the devastation spread. Soon the resulting famine wreaked havoc among the people. Eventually, things got so bad that human life began to deteriorate and the people were forced to turn to cannibalism. The texts report that Noah continued to beg Enki for help. Enki, however, must have felt bound by the decisions of the other deities because, for a while, he did not respond. But finally, when the sight of mankind starving and disintegrating was more than he could stand, Enki did respond, and once again clashed with his brother. He instructed the people to make a loud noise in the land, but do not revere your gods, do not pray to your goddesses. He was asking for total disobedience at this point, and while all of this turmoil was going on as a distraction, Enki once again took action. Once again, we do not know exactly what he did because the texts are, again, unfortunately quite fragmented, but they do disclose that he convened a secret assembly of the elders in his temple. Enki addresses them with his grievances, that he stands against these decisions of the other gods to starve the humans. Then he outlines a plan of action that somehow involved the areas under his command in the sea and South Africa. What actually happened, as I said, has been lost, but we can tell that it must have been successful because, once again, Enlil becomes enraged. Accusations are fired back and forth, and once again Enlil demands that Enki stop feeding the people. Then suddenly, Enki bursts out in laughter. We can only imagine the pandemonium in the chambers at that point. Enki and Enlil were shouting curses back and forth at each other. It was absolute chaos. When the meeting is finally called back into order, Enlil once again takes the floor. He immediately reminds everyone that this had been a unanimous decision by all of the Anunnaki gods, and then proceeds to recall all the instances where Enki had broken the rules when it came to issues involving the humans. He then reveals the information that the scientists had uncovered regarding the ice shelf about to break off down in Antarctica and how the resulting killing flood would be the perfect opportunity to doom mankind. And that, of course, leads us up to the flood story. So thus ends this prequel. Now let's examine this for a moment, specifically Enlil's behavior. You know, we can almost excuse the other Anunnaki gods for going along with Enlil's efforts to extinguish the humans, because sucking up to leaders, whether or not you actually believe in what they're doing, is something that we humans have done and continue to do on a constant basis. After all, most of the Anunnaki perceived humanity as little more than cattle. And of course, Enki continues to be the champion of humanity and acts on our behalf as often as possible. But why was Enlil's actions towards the humans always so negative? Part of it was undoubtedly the pressure of being the Anunnaki commander here on Earth. Everything rested on his shoulders. The success of the entire Anunnaki mission here on Earth was on him. And the fact that his father was the leader of Nibiru, the Anunnaki home planet, probably added to that pressure. You know, I have a close friend who has spent the majority of his life working for his parents, so I know firsthand what a heavy burden that can be. But that wouldn't explain all of Enlil's behavioral issues, so let's dig a little deeper. Is he a narcissist? Well, he certainly does exhibit various narcissistic behaviors. He likes to run a tight ship, and he expects everyone under him to fall in line with all of his decisions, which is obviously why he has so many issues with Enki. But most narcissists will occasionally show compassion as well, and it appears that Enlil has all but lost that ability. So there's something else going on inside him. So let's dig a little deeper. I believe that Enlil's anger and negativity towards the humans stems out of fear. That's right. Please allow me to explain. Now let's remember that a few episodes back I mentioned that once the settlements were up and running, there were roughly 600 Anunnaki here on planet Earth. Since that time, we've also mentioned a few of them have had children. So let's be extremely generous and say that perhaps there were 700 to 800 of them on Earth by the time of the flood. And we also learned that once given the ability to procreate, the humans reproduced at an alarming rate. I don't think that it is completely out of the question that by this exact same time, there were probably 3 to 4 times as many humans on Earth as there were Anunnaki, if not more. And we already know that Enlil was fearful of what the humans were capable of when they organized. Case in point, the Tower of Babel incident, where upon seeing what the humans had created, Enlil proclaimed, "And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do now will be impossible for them." Those are the words of fear, my friends, the words of a controlling person who feels that he is about to lose control. Fear is a strong motivator. It can convince people to do things that they would not normally do, or respond to a situation with great cruelty, which I believe was the motivation behind Enlil's attempts to destroy humanity. He felt that he was losing his control over the population, that it was only a matter of time before the humans realized what was really going on and rose up to overthrow their gods. We have all heard that saying that there is power in numbers. The Anunnaki may have had the technological advantage back then, but the humans had the numbers. And I believe that this fact alone scared Enlil more than anything. His fear was eating him up from the inside out, and that is why he so desperately wanted them gone. And that is where I will leave you for this episode. You have quite a lot to digest there, and we have so much more to cover and learn. I mentioned earlier in this episode that on future shows, we would be diving into the flood story in more detail, and that is exactly where we will begin on the next program. I'm Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. Also, if you have any questions regarding the content discussed on this program, just message me through madmarktv.com or on any of my social media platforms. I also wish to remind everyone that listening to this program is no excuse to not read the book that we are discussing here, The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin. It is an amazing work, and I am leaving out much of the information in order to keep the show moving properly. So do yourselves a favor and read that book. Today we have taken another step in our ongoing journey to learn the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to the mysteries that puzzle mankind.